One of the great Nidhyasana texts alongside the Ashtavakra Gita, the Avadutta Gita, and the Ribhu Gita, and even the Yoga Vasishta, is the Mandukya Upanishad Karika. Now, the Mandukya Upanishad Karika is a wonderful text, and within this text, we have the Mandukya Upanishad, but we also have commentary by the great Advaita Master Shankara and his guru's guru, Gaudapada, two of the most influential people within Advaita Vedanta. And so this text is just like the other Nidhyasana texts, where it's a verification of what we understand after enlightenment, or it's a text we should be introduced to after enlightenment. Though in saying that, you would read the Upanishads before enlightenment, because that makes up part of the Prasthana Trahi, which is the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. But what I'm talking about here is the Mandukya Upanishad Karika with the commentaries, because the commentaries really elaborate and bring out the sweet nectar of the Upanishad. This verse within the Mandukya Upanishad pretty much sums up the nature of our existence, but it also gives us a little bit more information between the experiential and the non-experiential. So let's tackle this verse from the Mandukya Upanishad. All this is verily Brahman. This Atman is Brahman. This Atman has 4 quarters. Now the first 2 sentences direct us straight towards the nature of reality. All this is verily Brahman. It is one undifferentiated consciousness. There is no differentiation. There is no separation. That's an illusion within our mind that we create according to conditioning and socialization. So the Atman is Brahman. So the Atman being that undifferentiated aspect within ourselves, that localization of the one consciousness within ourselves. That's what the Atman is, which is actually identical with Brahman. That's why they say the Atman is Brahman. And so we have that, right? We have all this is verily Brahman, and the Atman is Brahman. So we are ultimately all one without a second. There is no other. We get into the illusion that we are separate through the illusion of Maya, through the conditioning that we've endured, the socialization process we've endured, where we begin to measure this and that according to our own conditioning, which separates us from the actual reality of Brahman, understanding that all this is verily Brahman. But once we get rid of that hypnosis, once we begin to eliminate that, then we start to understand that this Atman is Brahman itself. But in this Upanishad, they go even a step further by stating that this Atman has 4 quarters. Now, what are these 4 quarters? We often hear the 4 states of consciousness within Vedanta. So these 4 states of consciousness differentiate between the experiential realm and the non-experiential realm of your Atman, which is identical with Brahman. And so these 4 states of consciousness are Visva, which is the waking state of consciousness, Taijasa, which is the dream state of consciousness, Prajna, which is the state of dreamless sleep, and Turiya, which is the same as Brahman or Atman, the ultimate state of reality. So we have these 4 states of consciousness, as I said, waking state, dream state, deep dreamless state of consciousness, and Turiya, the 4th. You often hear in the text the 4th state of consciousness, but they actually say in Sanskrit the Turiya, which is the undifferentiated state of consciousness. So what we see here is we see within the first 3, we see each state of consciousness merge into the next. So you have waking consciousness merge into dream state, and then dream state merge into deep dreamless state of consciousness, and then deep dreamless state merges into Turiya. So you have this almost a progression, but what we're seeing here is within the 3 states of consciousness, right, we are in the experiential realm. Now some say, but in a deep dreamless state of consciousness, I'm not really experiential. But you can still verify that you had a deep dreamless state of consciousness after waking. That's the point here, is that we have these experiential states that we can verify actually exist as an individual, but the Turiya is an aspect that is non-experiential that we cannot verify as an individual, because the individual, the ego itself, is part of the experiential realm. It's not part of the Turiya, the undifferentiated state of consciousness, even though it arises in the Turiya. See, everything in this arises in the Turiya state. All of the three states of consciousness arise out of the ocean of the Turiya to make the waves of the experiential realm. Now, this is very important because this relates to Om, the Sanskrit Om. And now Om, in some sense, is a representation of Brahman. A lot of people in Vedanta particularly will ask a master, how do we describe Brahman? Om. Om is how you describe Brahman. Now, the reason for this is that when we look at Om as A-U-M, which are the 3/4 of Om, which we would call the matras, is the 3/4 of Om. But there's a fourth aspect of Om, which is the amatra, which is the silence after we chant Om, which is the soundless aspect as opposed to the sound. So do you see here that the soundless aspect, the amatras, gives rise to the matras, which is the 3 aspects of A-U-M. So when we chant it, so we have this ebb and flow. Like I said, the experiential realm arising out of the infinite ocean of Turiya and then subsiding back in. And this is how we chant Om as well. And so the 4th syllable, the amatra, is what gives birth to the other 3. And so the letterless letter, the amatra, the silence, is what gives birth to the other 3 letters. And this is how we should be thinking about when we chant actually Om. We should be thinking about the 4 states of consciousness, the 4/4 of the Atman, the experiential realm, which is made up in the 3/4, and the non-experiential, that which gives life to the 3 experiential aspects, the Turiya. And so this is almost an instruction in how to abide in the Atman, which is Brahman, to abide in the Turiya. It's in the silence. It's in the soundless. And often when we chant Om, if we chant for long enough, it'll start to peter out and you'll start to go more silent, more silent, more silent. And then you'll just be in pure peace, Shanti. And we find this with a lot of other mantras as well, no matter whether it's Om Namah Shivaya, or even if we use a Buddhist mantra like Om Mani Padme Hum. If you chant the mantra long enough, then you get into this soundless state, this silence. But that's not the point. It's not the point of the mantra. The point is understanding Om as Brahman and understanding that it's the soundless quality that we should abide in. And this is why a lot of masters will remain in silence, because they understand that the sound is in the experiential realm. And when we continue to use sound, sometimes we will differentiate ourselves in language and we'll differentiate ourselves just because we are emitting the sound, which gives validity to some sort of identity. But when you're completely silent, there's no stimulation of the mind, and you're allowing the mind to continually subside. And you're actually getting out of the idea of language itself, because you're not then thinking in language, where our thoughts, if we think about it, are built on language itself. What if we never learned language? How would we think? Now that's something I'm tackling in a future book, but it's interesting. What would happen to thoughts if we didn't have any language or we had no concepts? And I'm not saying that's what a sage or a guru actually does, a master does, but in remaining silent, they continue to abide in that soundless state, the amatra of the Om mantra. And so it's a beautiful thing where we begin to bring our awareness back into the Turiya and not allow our awareness to get engaged with the experiential realm all the time. And that's what most of us do. We often entangle our awareness with the waking state, with the dream state, and even with the deep dreamless state. We often entangle our awareness there because we often think about who was the one who was dreaming. We often identify with the dreams we have. We identify with the waking experiences we have. But then in doing so, we forget the Turiya. And this is what the point is here. All is verily Brahman. This Atman is Brahman. This Atman has 4/4. Now, if we understand everything I've been saying, then we can begin to have a very intimate relationship with the Turiya level of consciousness, the 4th level of consciousness. And we can begin to experience our experiential state in a completely different way, because we continually abiding in the non-experiential realm of Turiya, the fourth level of consciousness. And from that state, then we can truly know the Atman, which is Brahman. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.